All right, everybody. Super excited to be up here today. We're going to talk about a video I've wanted to do for a long time. We're going to talk about all the different generations of the Corvettes, from the C1 to the C8. We're over here at Larz Anderson at Corvette Day. We're going to go through and talk about production of the car, the history, some of the coolest models from each year. I'm going to shoot a ton of cool cars up here. I've got a lot of video, a lot of pictures. We'll go through and share in this as well. But, you know, you think about the Corvette, it's one of the most iconic cars of all time. I think about, for me, growing up lower middle class in New England, in both Brockton and Hyde Park and Rosendale, right, in working class families. For me, if you had success, if you made back when I was a kid, if you got a Cadillac or if you got a Corvette. I was fortunate enough in the 2000s, mid 2000s, to get both. And I was super grateful. In my mind, I had made it, right? And you see these cars, they're phenomenal. There's so much history behind them. You'll see a lot of beautiful stuff here. We have stuff from, like I said, the early C1s, all the way to the latest C8 Z06s. I have not seen a C8 ZR1, although fair enough, it came out literally like to the public a week ago, so I'm not very surprised. But there's some super cool stuff in great colors, so I can't wait to go through and share it with you. With the C1 Corvette, and what a cool car to start with, a 1956 Corvette C1 in orange and white with an orange interior. This is a manual car, but let's talk about the C1 and the importance of it. In 1953, the Corvette came out for Corvette, and it was put together by Harley Earl and then Zora. And these cars came out in 53, fiberglass, 2-seat. It was America's sports car. But the problem was it was a Blue Flame 6, 150 horsepower, 2-speed Power Glide automatic, and they didn't sell very well, right? In 1953, they sold 300 cars. They were all hand-built in Flint, Michigan. In 54, the cars sold 4,000 units, but they were struggling, right? And then you found in 55, Ford came out with the T-Bird, and the T-Bird sold like crazy, almost 15,000 units the first year with a small V8. And Chevy realized they had to make a decision. Either we're going to go all in on the Corvette or we're going to kill the Corvette. So the Corvette came out, and what had happened was Chevy decided to come with that 283, and in 55, they sold just 700 cars. But in 56, the Corvette would really take off, and the car would become incredibly successful. In 57, you would get fuel injection, and you'd hit the vaunted number, 265 cubic inch motor, 265 horsepower, 1 horsepower per cubic inch. As the cars would evolve, what would happen is you would get into better style. I'm going to walk over here. There's a couple of 62s, and the cars would continue to evolve. You could get into the 327s. In 62, you would have this beautiful style. One of my favorite versions of the C1, you would get into the more modern rear end that would blend into the C2, but you'd have all the technology, the 327, the updated rear end, a little bit easier to live with on the inside. The interior was a little easier to get in and out of. So the C1 Corvette was an incredibly important iteration for Chevy, and it really changed how the American sports car was perceived. And it would take us into the C2, which most people consider the greatest generation of Corvette. Guys, so let's move on to the C2 Corvette, the Corvette that changed everything, considered to be the greatest generation of Corvettes of all time. We are super fortunate here at this show today to have a 63 fuel-injected split window in black with a red interior. You can see the fuel injection, the beautiful knockoff wheels, and the iconic one-year-only split window. When the C2s came out, they changed everything for performance and for style and how people thought about these cars. They were an iconic look. They had a ton of performance to back it up, and we're going to walk over right now and we're going to go look at a 67 C2 that has the 427. C2s were coming along and evolving. What you would see is you would go from a 327 all the way up to the 427, 435 horse. These cars were truly high-performance cars. You were starting to get into the muscle car wars, and the Corvettes were designed to both, be fast off the line, but also have high top speed and perform at the track. And when you get into here, you can see again, we have a beautiful 427, 67, side exhaust, Stinger hood with the big motor, and I think this is the 435 horsepower motors. This was the big dog motor that you could get in a C2. And again, you see the style would change subtly. The gills on the side would change from 63 to 67, but this was a short generation. You only had 5 years of this car, and the car sold very well. But the Mako Shark concept car that came out, it kind of changed a lot of people, and they wanted to get into that more futuristic style. So after a very short run with the iconic C2, we would get into the C3, and we'll talk about those in just 1 second. Let's talk about the C3 Corvette, the longest lived generation of Corvettes, 1968 to 1982. When the cars first launched in 68, they actually sold well, but they weren't perceived as well. There were a lot of problems. The cars kind of overheated. There were some gremlins that came in the car. As they would evolve, these cars would get to be a lot nicer and a lot more popular. In 71, again, you'd have the option of a 427, a 350, a 327. You still had a lot of different options on these cars. You also see this was the steel bumper front and back. You look at the gills, they were a little different in 71 and 72, and we're going to shoot a 72 convertible in just a second. These cars had that chrome paint around the gills. You had the Rally Sport wheels versus the wheel covers, and these cars would either be a 4-speed manual or you'd have the turbo 400 transmission. The options on these cars were pretty unlimited as you get into the early versions, you know, the trunk rack. Now, these cars were super impractical. We're going to shoot this 72 convertible over here. Guys, these cars were not practical. He has a 72 coupe that's also restored. That's beautiful. He also has a 71 454 car, which I love. You know, the convertible top, rally wheels. This one's completely original, which I wanted to. That's why, because this is an original version, right? You have original paint, original wheels, original interior. This is a turbo 400 car with a 350, and we have the window sticker on this car. We can see, you know, what would it have cost you back in 72 to get one of these cars? And you can take a look, this car would have been $6,600. Now, we did have a 1-year only C3, and that would have been the 73, which was a rear steel bumper, but a front rubber bumper car. There is one here. I'm going to go over and show you that, and then we'll get into the mid-70s cars, and then we'll go into the early 80s. Now, I don't know if I've seen any early 80s cars up here, so it might be a little more challenging, but I believe this one over here was the 73, which was that rubber nose front steel bumper back. The 1-year only for that car before they would change over to just the rubber bumpers front and back. Yep. So this is our 73, which was the, like I said, the 1 year they would make this version of the car. And you can see the gills completely change in 73. It was just one opening, similar interior, but then you'd have the steel bumper. So it was the 1-year only car for 73. Different gills from 71 and 72. Rear steel bumper, front rubber bumper. So just a completely different version of that car. Let's go take a look. There are some here. That's some mid-70s Corvettes, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap it up on the C3s. All right, let's talk about this 1975 Corvette. Now, at this time, the Corvette was iconic. The style was everywhere in the mid-70s. People loved this style of car. You know, in 79, you'd have the best-selling year of the Corvettes. They'd sell over 53,000, almost 54,000 Corvettes. But these cars over time became a little less loved, right? You had a few challenges. Like, the reality on these cars was smog had come in, the oil crisis. There was a lot of challenges with the mid-70s Corvettes, but they were so iconic stylistically that it didn't matter to people, right? People wanted this car, right? T-tops, big mag wheels, swoopy fenders. It just looked great. So, you know, these disco era Corvettes are still right now definitely becoming more loved, but for a long time people struggled with these. They wanted the steel bumpers like you see over there, right? They wanted something that was maybe a more collectible version like the 78 or the 82 versions you'd have out there. But these 75 Corvettes, the 75, 76, these were legitimately, since 1953, the lowest horsepower Corvettes we would have or ever have, right? This was kind of the dark days for Corvette as far as performance goes, but again, nobody cared. These were some of the best-selling Corvettes out there, and I still think they look absolutely iconic in this body style. Another thing the C3 Corvettes will bring to us is special edition versions. We have a 78 special edition here in that two-tone paint color with the red interior. We do know the owner on this car. He had a C4 previously. But Chevy understood that there was a demand, especially if you do with special edition cars, and they would do that. You'd have this, you'd have the pace car version this year, which was black and silver, and then 82, you'd have the collector car edition with special turbine wheels and this metallic type seat paint, coverings that people love. So Chevy understood as they moved along, and you'd see that come along as we get into the C4s. We'd start to get into more special editions, and as it would go through post that, you'd have tons of special edition Corvettes. Before we come along and the C4 Corvette would launch, we would have no 83 Corvette. There was an intention to get out the new C4 for 83, which was going to be the special edition 30th anniversary. Chevy had tons of problems. They couldn't get the car out, so you had the 84. Now, 84 was kind of a tough year. Now, the car was very well received. The publications loved it. It handled better. It brought performance back to the Corvette platform after the C3. But the challenge was you had the crossfire injection. They weren't super easy to work on at a 4-speed. 85, you would actually go to the newer version of the fuel injection. You would get a pretty funky transmission if you wanted, the Doug Nash 4+3. So you'd have this kind of weird amalgamation, but this car was worlds better when it came to performance, and people love these cars. The challenge with the C4s when they launched is there was a lot of technology that maybe the world wasn't ready for. You kind of had that funky digital dash. You had the 4+3 transmission, right? You had some pretty, different changes as far as the motor goes, but this car would continue to evolve. The C4 had a pretty long lifespan also from 1984 to 1996. There was some amazing special editions. You get the 96 Grand Sport, the 96 Special Edition. There's a 96 Special Edition convertible here. We'll go and shoot in just a second. And then the iconic ZR1s. In the early 1990s, you'd also see the Corvette go from the rounded taillights with the more concave setup to a more flush rear end with the squared off taillights. But again, when you think of a C4 Corvette, this is the car that actually brought Corvette into the modern era when it came to performance, and they're incredibly important. Now, they're not as loved, but people need to understand if it's not for the C4 Corvette, we probably don't have all the different iterations of C5, C6, C7 that would really take performance to the next level, and these cars mattered a ton. We're going to go take a look at a ZR1, and then we'll look at that collector's edition C4. The Hill C4 Corvette, we have a 1992 ZR1. This car, when it came out, was a game changer, right? You had the different motor. This was a dual overhead cam motor, 12 coats of oil, 375 horsepower in the original version. As it would evolve, you get up to 400 horsepower, 6-speed manual transmission, wider than the standard Corvette. So if you saw one next to it, this car was physically wider, bigger wheels. This car was the game changer. This car really took Corvette back to world dominance when it came competing against the Porsches and the Ferraris of the world. And this car was like $60,000 new, right? It was basically the price of a base Corvette and then double it for the ZR1 package. The struggle for the ZR1 is it just didn't look different and special enough to get people to buy them in massive numbers. It wasn't a performance thing. The performance on these cars were phenomenal. People loved the performance, but they were a little exotic with that motor. They were a little tougher to work on. Again, a 12-quart oil pan, so you're 12 quarts of oil to change the oil on this car. So the car had a lot of demands, but performance was amazing. I still think they look great. I'm a sucker for the C4s. I think they're actually just a great-looking car, and that ZR1 was that king of the hill. But we're going to talk about a couple of different models, right? You'd also have the 96 Grand Sport. We don't have one of those up here. They were blue with a white stripe with the red slash, but you also have the 96 Special Edition. This is a 96 Special Edition. Now, these cars came in two flavors, right? You had the manual transmission, which was this car. That was the LT4 motor, and that car actually had 330 horsepower. So you had this blast gasp in the regular version. You go from the LT1 to the LT4. You would get 330 horsepower with the manual, the sport seats, and these one-year-only special edition wheels. So this was that last gasp of the C4. But again, let's talk about how important the C4 was and how people kind of forget about it. These cars mattered, and we get into the C5. The C5 was a complete game changer. Anyone you've ever talked to that's owned a C5 will tell you it's the best driving, most comfortable Corvette, and we're going to go take a look at those in just a second. We're coming to the C5 Corvettes right now. These Corvettes were out from 1997 to 2004, and these cars, again, were wildly important. We have a couple of convertibles here. This would have the LS1, 345 horsepower, but these cars were great driving cars. Everything the C4 did wrong with the squeaks and the rattles and some of the quality control, they really got right in the C5. The car drove great. It was the last year of the pop-up headlight cars. They looked great. When this car came out in 97, I remember being, in my early 20s, and this car was iconic. Everyone wanted a C5 because it was just that first generation of Corvette. You got to remember, the C3 was around from 68 to 82, and the C4 was around from 84 to 96. So for 30 years almost, you had two of these kind of really cool looking cars that were more about style than function and performance. The C5 came along and absolutely changed that. But I'll tell you right now, what was crazy with the C5s is when you would get over to it, now you got into the Z06, and there are two Z06 C5s here that I want to share with you. And the reason the C6 Z05 was so important is this this was a car that was really serious about performance. If you think what Corvette had done, style was as important as performance for such a long time with the Corvettes. The C5 Z06 completely changed that, right? We're getting into a car with serious horsepower numbers, a real performance suspension, but you look at one thing on here, it's a fixed coupe. This was the first fixed coupe Corvette without an open roof since 1967. So now we're looking at a car that was truly track designed, truly designed to be a high performance vehicle without any compromises to give up for like comfort, right? This wasn't, they said, look, we don't really care about taking the roof off. If you want one of these cars, this car is about driving fast and driving fast on a track and in a straight line. The downside to this car is it was not super comfortable. They put a performance suspension in this car, and the performance suspension was serious business. Like, this car was a car you did not drive every day, right? This car was, it was tough. The fixed coupe, the aggressive suspension, right? You know, you get your 400 horsepower in these cars. These cars were true track cars. But this is where the C5 really came into its own and would absolutely tie into what we would see as we would go into the next generation of C6s. This is where performance really came back for Chevrolet, and we would absolutely dominate performance as we would get into the C6 generation. Guys, we're moving on to the C6s. The C6s saw a ton of innovation. This car was out from 2005 to 2013, and these cars were incredible. The LS2 base model came out with 400 horsepower. You know, you think back just to that ZR1 we were looking at just a little earlier with the C4, you know, it was a big deal to have 400 horsepower. Now the base model had 400 horse, and you had, you know, all the new technology. For the first time in like 3 generations, you had no pop-up headlights. We went to a more flush, a more sleek look, and these cars did a little bit of everything. Right? You'd have the Grand Sport that would come out with these. You'd have a Z06. You'd have a ZR1. These cars were iconic. Now, everything the C5 did well, these cars did well too. So we have over here the LS3. This is a 435 horsepower motor. This is a 2008. This is a 2005. And these cars will continue to evolve through the whole iteration. We're going to go through and look and show you a Z06 C6 and what that car brought to the table. But again, these cars were great looking. Now, to me, these were also the first Corvettes that really kind of competed with some of the exotic cars as far as style went. As beautiful as the C5 was, it was very subdued. The C6s brought an exotic look to what you'd have in the Corvettes, and they brought performance to match it. So we're going to go find a couple of C6. So now we get into the high performance Z06 C6. 505 horsepower. We've crossed over the 500 horsepower threshold again. Beautiful style, the 427 motor, and again, just incredible performance. The challenge on this car, and again, if you watch Top Gear back in the day, they would talk about like how harsh this car drove. This is an amazing car, but it was not a car you typically wanted to everyday drive. It was really more of a car that was track-based, that had great performance, that looked incredible. I mean, you look at the factory brakes, the slotted rotors, the giant rotors they had on it, you know, the aero on the car, how low it is to the ground. These cars were a game changer, but not everybody loved these cars. Again, they were a little too harsh, so they gave you the brakes, they gave you some of the other components, made it a little bit more livable. So now you had a beautiful car that you could go out and drive almost every day, but you had some amazing performance to go along with it. So the C6 was incredibly important, but things were about to change and change in a big way with the C7. The last iteration of the front drive Corvettes, the C7 was a game changer. They would return the Stingray nameplate, and they would bring some absolutely monstrous performance with it. Made our way to the C7 Corvettes. The last generation of the front drive. These cars were iconic for many reasons. These cars brought back the iconic Stingray badge. They really brought in that truly exotic look on the cars. We talked about the C6 being more exotic. These cars, I remember when this came out, a good buddy of mine said, man, have you seen the new car that looks like a Ferrari, the new Corvette? And it did. And these cars, again, had all these different flavors. You'd have a Z51 like we see here with the handling package. You get into the Grand Sports right next to us, which again, better handling, better brakes, different wheels. I mean, these cars just looked incredible. You would have ZR1. We had a ZR1 here, unfortunately it left. I charged super high performance. You get some absolutely incredible performance on these cars. I mean, again, they did everything. Chevy did everything Chevy could with a rear drive car. You know, I look at the final version, right? These were over 600 horsepower. The ZR1 was over 750 horsepower. Chevy got every piece of performance and technology they could, out of a C7 Corvette. The reality was high 2 seconds was as fast as they were ever going to go because of traction issues. And you can see these cars. I mean, these are essentially street slicks. This car was a race car for the road, but with the layout of the car, you just couldn't get better performance. So we had to go to the C8, and we'll talk about how people felt about the C8. We've got a lot of beautiful C8s here. I'm going to walk you through. We've got from 2020 to now to 2025, we have the E-Ray. The E-Ray is an absolutely amazing car. 635 horsepower, dual motors in the front, all-wheel drive, but you have a lot of people that are stuck in the past with Chevrolet, right? They don't want to go in and they say, I don't want a hybrid. Guys, it's coming. The Zora is coming, right? We're going to have a dual electric motor car. The C8 is going to be electrified. It is what it is. This car is absolutely incredible. The fact that we can actually get front grip, the fact that this is faster 0 to 60 than the Z06, right? And it really does almost compete with the ZR1 with 400, 500 less horsepower because of those two front electric motors. This car is absolutely incredible. And everything they did right about the C8, and they did a lot right about the C8, the mid-engine design, the gorgeous style on it, the fact that it actually has a functional frunk and a usable trunk that you can throw 2 sets of golf clubs, like this is the future. The C8's an absolutely stunning car. I like the E-Ray. Again, I think it's cool. We shouldn't shy away from technology. Remember, when the Corvette got good with the C4, it's because they embraced technology. They went away from the antiquated technology in the C3s. They got better performance-wise because they went to technology. So I just asked my Corvette friends, don't be afraid of the rear engine or the mid-engine. Don't be afraid of the electric that's going to happen. It's going to happen, guys. This is the future of these cars. But the C8's stunning, right? From the front to back, it's a gorgeous car. I love the interior. I think this is the first car that Chevrolet really honored what a $100,000 car should be in the interior, because they just did a great job. This looks like an interior I would find in any high-performance luxury car, and it's the interior we've deserved all along, even in the C7s and C6s, which weren't quite as nice. So Chevy just did an absolutely amazing job. And I think so. The C8, we saw the E-Ray. We have the base model here. This is a friend of ours. It's 2021, under 5,000 miles. This does have the performance package, so the active exhaust, the different suspension, 495 horse. He came from a Shelby GT350. Absolutely loves the car, and I don't blame him. It's beautiful. We also have the Z06. Now the Z06, again, is just a track monster. You see the wide body kit on these, over 600 horsepower. And again, this is, before you just came with the ZR1, I mean, these cars were ridiculous, putting up crazy lap times, incredible 0 to 60 times. These cars just absolutely sound crazy. And what's cool about this is a flat plane crank motor, 8,600, 8,900 RPM redline. So you have this big V8 with a supercharger with 86 or 8,900 RPM redline. I mean, this is a screamer, but it also looks incredible. Again, you get the different brakes, the better performance. You can even see the size difference on the tires. And again, the base C8's a monster when it comes to performance. I mean, we're talking 0 to 60 in the low 3s, 190 miles an hour. These cars are 200 mile an hour cars, 0 to 60 in the high 2s. And again, the only issue they run into these was traction, right? We talked about that E-Ray just a second ago. The E-Ray solves that with the electric front motors. The ZR1 solves it with horsepower. 2.2 seconds to 60 is absolutely crazy for just a rear engine car, but just absolutely beautiful. And again, we can't hate on the Z8s, guys. We have to embrace what's coming. Like, the future is here. So as I stand here and wrap up this video, guys, I have a C1 behind me. I've got a C2 over right here with the rear window, the split rear window coupe. We've got gorgeous C3s, including a 454. We've got C4s all around us, C5s, C6s, C8s, C7s. The Corvette legacy is going to live on forever. This car started out as a Blue Flame 6 with 150 horsepower and a 2-speed power glide, and it has morphed into a mid-engine monster with 1,064 horsepower and a dedicated group of followers who absolutely love these vehicles, and rightfully so. How can you not love America's sports car? It's one of the coolest cars ever made. So I would tell you right now, I believe we're at the beginning, but at the end of the beginning, right? These first 72 years brought Corvette to a place that I don't think people ever thought they would get to. The next generation that's going to happen is going to blow people away, guys. What we're going to have is we're going to have the Zorro. We're going to have all-electric Corvettes. We're going to have Corvettes that are hybrid. We're going to have Corvettes that, are all-wheel drive with 1,000 horsepower that do 0 to 60, 1.5 seconds, that rival what Tesla's doing in a big sedan. We're going to have cars that handle like you've never seen. We're going to set Nürburgring times and 0 to 60 times and quarter-mile times that people could only dream of. We're going to look back on this beautiful 63 fuel-injected split-window coupe as the grandfather to some amazing technology, but I just challenge the community. we also have to get into the mindset that the Corvette doesn't have to be what it always was. You know, you think about what the Corvette's always stayed true to, and I think it's going to continue to try to do that. 2 seats, V8 power, or at least aspirations of V8 power with the first gen in 53 and 54. And iconic style, right? The Corvette doesn't have to be the fastest to sell the best. I told you, the best-selling year for Corvette, 1979, with almost 54,000 cars. The worst-selling year, 1953. Second worst-selling year, 1955, the first year of the V8. So performance isn't always the indicator. We have to make cars that people want, that people desire, and as we move on, those electric cars are going to become the future. So I just ask that you have an open mind, you continue to enjoy the hobby. I give kudos to this club. It was an amazing show. There's a ton of beautiful cars up here. I ask you to subscribe. If you haven't, hit that like button, and I look forward to seeing all of you at the shows very soon. Thank you, guys.